What's up, everyone? Today we're going to talk about how you can process pipeline input into your custom scripts or functions using begin, process, and end blocks. This is a really great feature that you can use, and then you can also use it to process multiple parameter values for your script or function. Let's go ahead and get started. First, let's take a look at our example function here. It's just called show begin process end. On line 2, we have our commandlet binding attribute, just giving us compiled commandlet functionality inside of our function here. I have just one parameter, and you'll notice in the parameter attribute, it is mandatory. And then we have another attribute here called value from pipeline. It's just an integer, and the name of that parameter is item. Then we have 3 blocks here of code with the keywords begin, process, and end. And inside each of those is the code that belongs to each of those sections. I believe you don't have to define begin and end. I think you can get away with just doing process, but we're going to show an example here of all 3 of them. Now, each block executes in a certain order. Obviously, begin is first, process is the middle, end is last. The begin block will execute only once right at the very beginning. The process block will process however many times it needs to, and then the end block is at the very end right as the script or function exits. As it sits right now, let's go ahead and take a look at what this looks like. I'm going to highlight all this and press F8 to bring that function into my current section here. And what we'll do is just pass in several numbers into it. We can do that quite easily doing this type of syntax. 1.5. That will just output the numbers 1 through 5. So I can take that and I'm going to pipe it to my custom function here, show begin, process end. And let's take a look at this output here. And it does exactly what we should hope it would do. We see this is the begin block, statement out. We show that it is processing item, $item, that's our parameter value. And we see it does it 5 times because we passed it 5 numbers. And then once at the very end, this is the end block. Perfect. This did exactly what we had hoped. It took pipeline values of the numbers 1 through 5, ran it through a function. Notice we didn't even have to do anything here in the process block of like a for each loop or anything like that. It just knew that I am processing input from the pipeline in my process block here and just did it automatically. In addition to taking input like this, it can also be a variable. So if we were to do something like int array equals 1 through 5, here's int array. If we output that again, it's just the numbers 1 through 5. And we can take int array and pass it to our function here and gives us the exact same thing. This is because it is able to match up. It sees the int array has integers in it and it matches it to our item parameter. Let's show how we can use the begin and end blocks just a little bit differently to do exactly that, to maybe set up some things that we need for the function, and then at the end of it, use the end block to output that. So I'm going to erase this here, and we'll go to a new line. And let's say we want to add these numbers up, but we want to make sure we start at 0, that we don't have anything in there. And then we are going to put in a counter to see how many things we added up. So we have 2 variables here. We're going to leave our processing item just so we can see that output and how it processes what we're passing in from the pipeline. And we're going to do sum plus equal the current item. And then we're going to add 1 to our count each time it processes something from the pipeline, just to keep track of how many things we are processing. And then at the very end, we're just going to output some information here. We'll say the sum of the items is sum, and then the total number of items is count. Format all of that. Perfect. Again, in our begin block, we're setting up things that we need for our function to process. So we're zeroing out sum and count. And then in our process block, we're processing through each item. We're adding to our sum of the current item value, and then adding how many things we're adding. And at the end, we're outputting our results here. Again, get this new version of our function in here. And let's go back up and let's take our int array, pass it into our function here. Now we see processing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, which is what we're expecting. And at the end, The sum of the items is 15, and the total number of items is 5. Now, we didn't have any output or anything going on in our begin block, but we know it's still executed because if we were to run this again, it's not continually adding on top of them. And it only executed once just to zero those out and get us going there. Now, this function as we have it right now is great for passing in values from the pipeline, multiple values even. But our parameter here, $item, is it capable of processing multiple items? Let's take a look and see what happens. Let's just call show begin process end. We'll give it an item. Let's just give it one item. We'll give it the number 5. And okay, that's what we expected. It only had one thing to process. Its total sum is 5, and we only had one count. All right, pretty straightforward. But what if we were to try to pass in an array of items here like we did before? So we'll put this in parentheses. And let's say we want to do the same thing. We want to add up 1 through 5 here. And this is going to give us an error. It's going to say the parameter item, we can't take this object that we have, the 1 through 5, and add it onto each other. Basically, it's having an issue on line 17 because it can't take 0, which is an integer, and try to add this object to it. And that's because our process block can only natively process things that are coming in from the pipeline. In this case, we're passing in our list or array of values in as our parameter, which is only supposed to be a single integer. But we can make a couple of changes here in order to accommodate either multiple pipeline values or multiple parameter values. We have to come in here and we'll change this to an array of integers by adding some more square brackets there. Go ahead and save that change. However, our process block, as I just mentioned, only works on pipeline values. It doesn't work on multiple parameter values. Because when the process block is going through and processing pipeline values, it's only taking one value at a time. It doesn't see all the values coming in. It just goes, oh, there's one value in the pipeline that's coming next, and then another one, then another one. It doesn't know how many necessarily there are. In order to accommodate both of these scenarios, we need to come into our process block, and this is where we actually add a for each block. So we'll say for each in item, and then we'll take each of these in here. So let's take this out and put our logic here inside of our for each loop. Now we then need to change our current item to just a lowercase I and save that. What we're doing here is the process block will still iterate through multiple pipeline objects, but our for each is going to iterate through multiple parameter values if we call it not using values from the pipeline. We go ahead and highlight all of this. And we'll bring in our current version here of our function. Now let's go back to running this version where we're passing in multiple values into our parameter. And now it executes as expected. We're processing 1 through 5. The sum of these items is 15, and the total number is 5, what we expected. Now you might be wondering why we had to add the for each. And as we already talked about, it's to process multiple items that are coming in through our item parameter. And we also had to change our variable type on our item parameter to be an array of integers instead of just a single integer. I'm going to add a little bit of code here to show you how the process block is actually processing the incoming data. So let's go here and let's just say what is our current input, and we'll do $item. And let's update this function in our current session. So now let's go back. We'll do 1 through 5, show begin process end, and see its output. And this is what I was talking about earlier, where it is processing a single value from the pipeline one at a time. So as we enter the process block here, and on line 16 is what we see first, where input is just the number 1, because that's one value from the pipeline. It processed it. Our next input is 2, 3, 4, 5, and it's only processing those one at a time. Now the for each still works because $item is just one item. You can do a for each on just one thing. That's perfectly fine. It's normally made to do it on multiple things, but you can do just one thing. On line 17, when we're saying for each I an item at this point is just one number, which is perfectly fine. We process it and it continues on. Now let's leave this up here and let's look at our other version where we're passing in multiple values into the parameter, and let's compare their output. Here our input is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So it has entered the process block and the item value is all of our values at once. And then it iterates through those in the for each and then gives us our output. So in the example up here where we're taking in values from the pipeline, it runs through the process block 5 different times. But when we give it multiple values through a parameter, it is only hitting that process block once. And then it's the power of the for each loop that actually iterates through each value in order to add them up for us. I remember the first time I tried to do something like this, I thought it was a little bit confusing. So hopefully this example and seeing the output this way will help you figure out how this works exactly. If you're only concerned about taking input from the pipeline, then you don't need to do the for each or change, your data type on your parameter here. But if you want to be able to do both, either take multiple pipeline values or take multiple parameter values, this is how you have to do it. It almost seems a little bit redundant, but hopefully once you see how it's working here with this example and the output that we see, that it's unfortunately necessary. It seems like a little bit extra code, but that is what it is. That's just how it works, unfortunately. That is for this video. Hopefully you can see how adding begin process and end blocks can help you process pipeline input, and then a couple of extra changes that you need to make if you want to process multiple values directly on the parameter itself. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.